Okay, thank you very much for the wonderful invitation for me to give you the keynote speech today, even though it is virtual. I can remember I visited you a few years ago to give a talk to your students and staff members. I've been working in the academia for the last 39 years, almost 40 years, in different universities, 2 universities in Sri Lanka and 3 universities in the UK, which is evidenced by my wonderful hairstyle now. Saman is also here from Japan. He's also following my hairstyle. Thank you, Saman.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I have been working on a paper in the last few months with one of my ex-PhD students, who is now a lecturer, young lecturer at the University of Stirling here in Scotland. We have just submitted this paper, which has been provisionally accepted. Hopefully, this will get accepted soon by the journal called Critical Perspectives on Acting, an internationally reputed, well-ranked critical accounting journal, where I am also serving as an editorial board member. Shall we read this abstract for us to reflect on something before we move on? We build on the theory of orders of worth exposed by Boltanski and his associates to understand how disputes emerge in situations and how such disputes themselves reach agreements in the context of community engagements by an NGO. Based on a 9-month period of field work at an NGO river care program in Malaysia, we find that, not the researcher, we find that in situations of disputes, coordinating acts are predicted upon moral justifications by social actors, making the program accountable to multiple stakeholders. Moreover, these coordinating acts develop dialogic accounting and transform felt accountability forms into adaptive accountability forms. So we conclude that NGO accountability in a developing country like Malaysia is a manifestation of the ability of moral justifications governed by multiple orders of worth, because we built on the theory of orders of worth. And that such adaptive accountability forms mediate to assimilate global development agendas into local policies and programs. So we have been working on this paper out of my PhD, ex-PhD student, PhD thesis. We have spent about 2 years so far to get the paper into this current final stage. As you see here, this is a qualitative case study. The case is a river care program in Malaysia. My students spent 9 months in this program. He also had an internship. He also had some engagements with the community there. He spoke to various government and NGO of workers. He maintained tight, intimate relationships with people there. He walked their walk. He talked their talk over a period of 9 months. That is how we do qualitative case studies. But also after the field work, we need to get ourselves detached over a period of reflection in order to distance ourselves from the field work, in order to continue a kind of post-field work thinking with a particular theoretical framework. In this case, we used Boltanski and Thevenot and their followers, 2 French philosophers, Boltanski and Thevenot, and their followers, who developed the theory, a social theory of orders of work. Therefore, a qualitative case study is not only a field work, but also a serious theoretical engagement. Therefore, in the end, we extend our theoretical understanding of something. In this case, as you see here, we said NGO accountability in a developing country like Malaysia is a manifestation of the ability of moral justifications. That is how we extend our understanding of accountability in accounting research. Therefore, a qualitative case study is a serious theoretical engagement. Having this in mind, I try to talk about today what is the new normal now in the post-corona world we are entering at. And what count qualitative research in particular in the context of this new normal? How can we do qualitative research maybe differently in the future? The new normal is the governing discourse now to characterize the world we are now entering in. The COVID-19 pandemic has had massive implications for the construction of the new normal. As a result, we have been forced into rapid Big Bang of introduction of technologies such as this Zoom. Now we are following tech-driven practices in an unprecedented manner. And we have been pressured to do so. Therefore, now the new normal has created a process of normalization in our everyday life. Therefore, there is a need for a more reflexive normalization of our everyday practices, of our everyday work, thinking about how the technology plays a role. This normalization involves new ways of doing things, like I am doing lectures now in this way. But at the same time, we are exercising cohesion, cognitive participation, collective action, and reflexive monitoring in order to construct the new normal. Therefore, this is a social construction, creating a new culture of living, new way of life for all of us. This applies to our work. This applies to our family life. This applies to our children's education. And also this applies to research practices, including qualitative research. Okay, shall we just think about this for a moment? You are a university. I am here representing a university. My university is a world-class, very old university. Father of economics, Adam Smith worked here. Father of economics. I don't know who the mother was. He wrote The Wealth of Nations when he worked here. He also did a qualitative case study before writing the book, The Wealth of Nations. His case study or research site was a pin manufacturing company. Pin manufacturing company. Not a temple, pin manufacturing company. He went there, he observed what was happening, he talked to people there, he was involved in understanding what is the situations in the context of what they call Scottish Enlightenment in the 18th century. He developed economic concepts such as labor division, specialization. So he wrote the book by embedding these concepts. The Wealth of Nations emerged. So in that way, university researchers do research. Then we teach by using our research outcome. That is what we do here. Therefore, our teaching is inherently research-led, research-informed. Policymakers can also follow us. We are the forerunners before policymaking. Thousands of policymakers in the world followed, for example, Adam Smith's thinking. Therefore, policymaking can also be research-led. Therefore, university must be there playing that prominent research role. Research is a form, university is a form of civilization, making research prominent. If we do research at a university, what we also do is that we preserve the university. That means if you don't do research, we destroy the university. By doing research, we can preserve the notion of university, which can further research for the well-being of a society. But now we are living in an era of neoliberalization. Everything is now governed by the market. Therefore, university programs, university degree courses are now in the context of the market. Market determines everything, including universities are being ranked competitively, hence universities in competition with other universities in the global market. Similarly, our research is also being ranked, assessed, and calculated. The accounting practices. Ranking, assessing, calculating, they are all accounting practices happening in the global neoliberal capitalism. Unlike in Adam Smith days. We need to understand what is going on in that way. But still, we do research, even for the purpose of this neoliberal market. I have to emphasize this. Research is not consulting. Research is academic, and it is inherently international. Researchers' role is to understand what is going on in the world. Adam Smith did that. What is going on in factories being mushroomed over the industrial revolution in the 18th century? What is going on? How and why things happen? How and why things are now happening? These are key fundamental aims and questions for a piece of academic research. In contrast, consultants at very surface level, consultants who don't read research articles, or consultants who can't understand research articles, provide consultancy in terms of what should happen or how to do things, how to do time management, for example, how to be an effective, efficient manager, how to do things better, or how to sit down better, how to eat better, how to wear better. Yeah? Prescriptions. That is not research. Therefore, at the end of a piece of research, you should not prescribe anything. You should not come out with certain recommendations for practitioners. That is not research. That is the output of a consultancy report. An academic article doesn't have recommendations. I know that some researchers in Sri Lankan audience may actually ask, what are your recommendations? That is not part of research. So you should not mix up research and consultancy reports. As I said, I wanted to emphasize that. Now, research can be thought of very broadly. Research cannot be happening only through one type of methodology. I know in developing countries, lots of people know, or lots of people assume that there is only one methodology given by the God. So I call it the methodology. Hypothesis testing. Karl Popperian, hypothetico-deductive scientific methodology, borrowed from natural sciences. Like developing countries have underdevelopment characters, such as low income growth, per capita income, low per capita income, huge unemployments, etc. Fundamentals of underdevelopment, lack of diversity in research methodologies, lack of diversities in research methodologies is also an underdevelopment characteristic. I published a paper very recently about this. But here in Glasgow, in our business school, different people follow different research traditions. Research is diverse, methodologies are diverse. So I can summarize this diversity using this diagram, a typology of research paradigms. Look at the horizontal axis. It represents the origin of ideas, research data. The origin can either be local or origin can be a priori from previous research. And look at the vertical axis that represents whether you agree with something or disagree with something, consensus or dissensus, relation to a particular idea, meaning discourse, a framing of something. Shall we move on? If you are operating at a very local context, like my Malaysian case study, River Care program, it is very local. It is very micro. Operations are at mundane level. And also, you don't agree with what is happening. Instead, you may have a kind of conversation, a dialogue with people there in order to understand what is going on. And also in order to make some impact on that community by doing this research. Such research projects are called Dialogic Studies. Lots of people are now in accounting are doing this. Dialogic Studies. You go there, spend long time there, have dialogues with participants, respondents in communities, companies, villages, etc., in order to come out something theoretically important. I'm just briefing this out. Or alternatively, while you are disagreeing with what is going on in the world, you use a critical theory to make sense of what is going on. For example, you can use Karl Marx, a Marxian analysis, in order to give a critique of what is going on. For example, one could argue, we argued that management, accounting, and controls are helping to exploit labor in the service of capitalism. It is called a labor process approach in Marxian terms. Harry Braveman theorized it, following Karl Marx. If you are using such social theories, you can do such case studies, which we call critical studies. There are loads of publications in top-ranked journals following this approach. I will let you know what the journals are later on. Or alternatively again, you can go back to local sites and you can interpret with people through some conversations with them. They will interpret something for you. And also you may understand it from your point of view. Therefore, you will have your own interpretation as well. That means your biasness, your subjective judgments can also be systematically involved in the analysis of a case study. So such studies are called interpretive studies. And finally, positivistic studies. That is the methodology for which you are using. Positivistic studies. Positivism is a term used by a French sociologist, Comte, and positivistic ideas were borrowed from natural sciences by the social scientists, and they think that the world is very objective, therefore you should not deploy your subjective judgment in any analysis, and everything can be quantified, and everything can be confined into independent and dependent variables for the purpose of hypothesis testing. In the end, you look for the statistical significance, but you don't understand maybe finance significance, maybe economic significance. When 2008, 2009, global economic crisis happened, no economist, no finance researcher saw that even though they did thousands of hypothesis testing before. Why? They don't understand what is going on at mundane level. They don't contextualize their analysis within broader cultural, political, historical context. So what I want to tell you is that research should not happen only based on the methodology. You have to be developed. There are diverse, multiple ways of thinking for different alternative methodologies. Okay. So what I want to tell you is that research should happen in a vibrant research environment where people value this diversity, where people respect each other's research paradigms. It is that vibrant environment in which your universities can be universities, and your universities can hand in hand with world-class universities around the world. Hence, I want to emphasize 4 major problems of positivism, the methodology. Most positivistic researchers don't know the underlying philosophy of their research. This philosophy of research can be described in terms of 3 important ideas: ontology, epistemology, and methodology. Ontology leads to epistemology, and epistemology leads to methodology. I will come back to this, but for the time being, ontology means our understanding, our perception about the reality. In the case of social sciences, including management, social reality, how we understand, how we perceive social reality. Epistemology is the way we know about that social reality, the science of knowing, epistemology. And methodology, the way we frame our questions and the way we collect and analyze our data in order to make a conclusion. These philosophical underpinnings are systematically disregarded by positivist researchers. And also, secondly, they think that you should not be biased. Therefore, when you are even writing something, you don't use the first person. I, we, me, us. Sometimes you may teach your undergraduates, don't use these first person sentences. Instead, use the researcher. Because there is somebody called the researcher, and the researcher should be distant from the research. In research paradigms, you are also part of it. Therefore, your subjective involvement, your subjectivity is also part of your research. And sometimes you interact with objectivity, therefore there can be the situations of intersubjectivities. Because the social reality, social world is very complex, more complex than you think in terms of hypothesis testing, in terms of two types of variables, dependent and independent variables. That's a problem of positivism. And thirdly, you don't talk about the context, historical, political, economic context. But qualitative researcher locate your case study in that context and try to understand the complex interplay between the research site and the wider context in which this research site, that research site interacts with. Qualitative researcher situates the research project in that wider context, whereas positivistic researcher ignores that. Or there can be a background section, but they don't theorize the context in order to see the interplay between the two. And analyses are theory-free. Of course, they think that the theory is the hypothesis and they are deduced from previous research, and they look for the statistical relations, statistical significance. Therefore, there is no any theoretical discussion. For them, theory is given. In my department, finance researchers do positivistic research, and they think always the theory is given. Mostly, they think that everything is governed by the extension of neoclassical economic theory, which is called agency theory. agency theory for most finance researchers is given. So these are some of key problems. We have systematic critiques of this. We have published a lot about these critiques. I also contributed to that debate in the past 30 years or so through my publications. Therefore, we have a systematic understanding of the problems of positivism. Instead, we promote post-positivistic research or anti-positivistic research. As you saw in the diagram before, they can be interpretive or dialogic or critical. They are all coming under the post-positivistic research tradition. They are mostly qualitative case studies, but also it can be ethnographic studies, borrowing from anthropological traditions. For example, I published a paper very recently, 2 years ago, having done an anthropological type, ethnographic type work in a rural village in Sri Lanka. Therefore, qualitative research will have a diverse, open-ended path for us to think of different creative, imaginative methodologies. I have a PhD student from China. Her research site was a taxi, Uber-like taxi in China. Uber version of China is called Didi taxis. A young girl, she spent 6 months in taxis in China in order to understand how those taxi drivers are governed by a platform technology, Didi technology. Therefore, there are lots of open-ended paths for us to do qualitative research. And also under positivistic, post-positivistic research, we use a theory to illuminate, to make sense of the story we are building up from the qualitative case study. You saw that at the beginning. We used the theory of orders of worth espoused by Boltanski and others. Therefore, our work is theoretical. By doing that, we may question the existing theories. We may modify existing theories. We may extend existing theories. That is the role of a qualitative researcher. What we do in practice of qualitative research is that we are exploring an array of meanings of the social world. Accounting happens in the social world. Accountability is constructed in the social world. Therefore, we borrow theories to make sense of such things. Accounting has no theory. Management has no theory. They are practices. Balance scorecard is not a theory. SWOT analysis is not a theory. Or five-force analysis of Michael Porter is not a theory. So we have to borrow theories from other disciplines. And we explore an array of meanings of the social world in the light of those theories. The meanings meanings of the social world, what are they? They represent the texture and the weave of our everyday lives. Our lives have a kind of texture, and our lives are actually woven in a kind of network relationship. This is what is in the social world. So we gather these people's experiences, their imaginings, and also we understand the significance of those meanings, the meanings the people generate. Therefore, accounting is a social construction, for example. Then, after the field work, we try to understand, we try to reflect on the ways that social processes, institutions, discourses, relationships work. Therefore, local study must be an international research project. If you do a case study in a remote village in Sri Lanka and you get it published in an internationally reputed journal, the paper will be read by everybody in the world because it is relevant to everybody. Hence, research is inherently, I always say, international. The texture and weave of everyday life of people. In a paper I published, I mentioned in Sri Lanka, I wrote somewhere in the paper like this: these women had been and remain in convivial kinship networks as relatives, close friends and neighbors, and these relationships are the basis of their self-help group. In their traditional relationships, they shared cultural rituals for working and saving together. Now gathered into formal groups and monitored through their prescribed accounting records, they are being disciplined to construct themselves as micro-entrepreneurs. That is what is happening in microfinance projects. So that is how we gather and understand and write the texture and weave of everyday life of people. And also we explain their experiences. A microfinance women said, so that is data. This is data. This quote is data. She said to me, as I said, sir, we are working hard and we working for our own families. Groups are there for us to consider, safeguard and so on. I'm not reading everything. So their experiences, their imaginings are expressed by these people. That is data. That is data. Not only statistics, this is also data. And we can publish in international articles. And their significance, the meaning significance. So another microfinance borrower said, in a way we have same feelings like in the case of C2 and so on. So they emphasize the image, they emphasize the significance they generate. So that is also data. And we sit down after the field work and we reflect on. For example, as part of my paper, we said, our analysis, our, not the researchers' analysis. Our analysis highlights 3 interrelated processes by which local Sri Lankan villages are integrated into the global financial system as sites of microfinance. The first process uses selected individuals, blah, blah, blah. The second into a productive hierarchical structure. The third uses this structure to enforce compulsory savings and so on. Therefore, this kind of reflection can be the case for everybody to see in the world. In that way, we are generalizing theoretically, not statistically, theoretically, for everybody to understand what is going on in the social world. Why do we do qualitative research? To celebrate richness, depth, nuance, context, multidimensionality, and complexity. Quantitative researchers, positivistic researchers cannot do this. What is going on? What is happening can be nicely articulated by doing such qualitative research. But it is a challenge now. Why? We can't go there. We have to minimize our interactions. As a qualitative researcher, you must be there. Your involvement, your engagement is the key. But you can't do that under the new normal. Therefore, we need to limit our interactions, limit our traveling. When I was doing my microfinance project, I traveled to Sri Lanka every year over 4 years in order to collect data, in order to conduct my ethnographic study in a remote village. But now I can't do that. I didn't travel to the country in the last 2 years. Hence, we need to think of alternatives. Number of webinars are now going on in our university here to understand, to reflect, to discuss how qualitative research, field work can be done remotely. I have a PhD student from Bangladesh, a lady. She wanted to go back to Bangladesh to study a farming village, to understand how rural farmers are now governed by the accountability technologies generated by SDGs, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So she couldn't go there. Therefore, she made arrangements to have telephone conversations with officers in the country, Zoom-based conversations with them, and also she spent on SIM cards and distributed the SIM cards to the village farmers. Then they were made available for her to do conversations over long hours. So in this way, she could minimize traveling, she could minimize interactions, but she managed to collect ample amount of a bank of data. Now she is at the final stage of writing up. Or alternatively, a new ethnographic field is now emerging. It is called not ethnography. Ethnography means science of understanding of people. Ethno means people. But netnography, science of understanding through networks, internet, netnographic methods. using the web-based technologies. For example, now in the future, you can use social media in order to have conversations with people, in order to engage people with your research project, in order to gather data from their understanding, their meanings, their expressions, their feelings, their opinions, their ideas can be gathered through, for example, Facebook tools. So Facebook tools are now being actually explored by qualitative researchers. Number of webinars are now going on in order to develop these ideas. And also, alternatively, you can do qualitative research based on archival-based research. Archives means documents. These documents can be contemporary documents, such as parliamentary Hansard reports, such as government documents, documents available in PDF forms on the internet, company annual reports published on the internet, archives. They can also be historical. You can collect historical data, maybe in the 19th century documents. Now, such documents are put on the internet by various libraries around the world. You can browse these documents. That is also conducting field work. You can conduct field work by in documents. You can speak to them in documents. You can understand their feelings, connections, relations in documents. And you can do a qualitative analysis. So in this way, there are lots of unlimited ways of thinking about. Look at this slide, the last dotted line. There can be more. It is down to you to think of more remote methods for you to undertake qualitative research under the new normal. If you've done such research, if you have done such research properly, you can publish your work in top-ranked, reputed journals. In order to get a paper published in such a journal, where I have also published, you may spend about 3 to 4 years on one paper. Therefore, publication in such a journal, one publication in such a journal is more than a PhD. Is more than a PhD. In our department, when we recruit young lecturers, because of the competition now in the market, we expect the candidate must have a PhD with a publication from the PhD, or a working paper which can be under review at one of these journals. Then we would actually recruit that person as a young lecturer. But if that person doesn't have a PhD, but if that person has number of publications, maybe 3 publications, for example, we value them as more than a PhD. It takes years and years to get such publications done. Administrative Science Quarterly, British Journal of Management, Org Studies, organizations, JMS, Journal of Management Studies, WES, Work, Employment and Society, Human Relations, AOS, Counting Organizations and Society, where I published my microfinance paper, Critical Perspectives on Accounting, the Malaysian paper I mentioned at the beginning is being published, Accounting, Auditing and Accountability Journal. I published about five papers in this journal in the last 2 years with various people. So if you browse these art journals, their articles, you can see how people publish qualitative case studies. Without knowing these journals, without knowing these articles, without reading these articles, you cannot go beyond the methodology you are celebrating. Hence, my conclusion today is that qualitative researcher experiences multiple situations and makes decisions as how to do things under circumstances, meaning there is no one single way of doing qualitative case studies. You face a situation, under the circumstances, you make decisions and design your research process. Under the new normal, we need to actually do things remotely now as much as possible. The new normal has therefore given you the opportunity to find out your own ways of thinking beyond textbook prescriptions on how to do research. I hope you will do some qualitative research in the future for you to be an internationally recognized academic. I wish you all the best and thank you very much for listening.